It's unsettling when the bill arrives and you discover you're not just paying for your home's electricity, you are paying for a hidden power that decides which tragedies become marketing opportunities and which are buried in silence. On one side, wildfires are devastating entire communities in California. Cities are plunged into darkness, families are losing everything in minutes as sparks from power lines turn mountains into flames. On the other hand, these same energy giants emerge as heroes in cute campaigns, colorful reports, and anti-hate projects, displaying their logos alongside phrases about empathy, diversity, and social justice. While ordinary people choose between paying their electricity bill or buying food, companies like PG&E and Southern California Edison pour millions into image programs, buying advertising space, funding whistleblower hotlines, and posing as guardians of the community. It's as if the arsonist himself paid for the shelter's renovation and even demanded a trophy for it. The media points the finger at the obvious villain: hate, extremists, generic structural racism. The message is perfect. You are invited to fear your neighbor, to watch your coworker, to distrust any comment but never to question who is profiting from this permanent climate of fear. Behind every anti-hate campaign, behind every incident report, lies a carefully constructed structure of money, lobbying, and reputation. While you may believe you are witnessing solidarity, what is actually at stake is ESG scoring, regulatory relief, and a moral shield worth millions. They told you that the problem is people's hatred, but nobody mentioned who's up there at the top of the pyramid, turning social misfortune into financial assets. Today, you're going to find out who's really at the top of the pyramid. If you want to understand how the system really works and discover the truth they're trying to erase, subscribe to the channel now. I'm Hendrix Cole, and I'm going to tell you what really happened with the money that turns tragedy into marketing behind PG&E, Southern California Edison, and the Ventura County versus Hate campaign. When you hear about hate hotlines, 211 Ventura County service, or protecting vulnerable communities, it seems like you're entering a world of empathy, support, and social justice. But if you pull the right thread, you discover that behind this discourse of protection lies an entire ecosystem of contracts, partnerships, and reports gleaming with ESG labels, created to clean up the image of those who have been linked for years to wildfires, blackouts, and billion-dollar scandals in California. While families call 211 seeking basic help, guidance, shelter, or support after a hate incident, the same names that appear in lawsuits and disaster headlines discreetly emerge as partners, collaborators, and funders of these programs. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's the very model of modern corporate governance, the famous ESG agenda, which has become a kind of moral shield for giants who have learned to transform guilt into an asset. In this dossier, we're not just going to look at what they say in emotional campaigns, but at where the money comes from, through which channels it passes, and what exactly it buys in terms of public narrative. We'll talk about the corporate woke agenda, the ESG scam, and how the fight against hate has become a perfect stage for companies, accused of causing enormous harm, to appear as protagonists of the cure. Because while on one hand there are real people suffering violence, fear, and loss, on the other hand there is a very sophisticated system using this pain as raw material to build reputation, political influence, and regulatory advantage. And when you start to follow step by step who signs the checks, who appears in the footnotes of reports, and those posing as heroes in public campaigns, show that the story you've been told about who the villain is begins to crumble. Many people think this whole virtue marketing thing is an exaggeration, until you stumble upon an external clue that wasn't written by any critic, YouTuber, or conspiracy theorist, but by the very system that claims to be saving everyone. Nobody connected the dots, but the clue was there all along. The first thing I did was go to the service that everyone presents as synonymous with help and empathy in Ventura County 211. In theory, it's just a helpline, an information center for those who need shelter, food, psychological support, and guidance in times of crisis. Nothing wrong with that. On the contrary, it sounds almost sacred. And that's exactly why almost no one questions who is behind this structure. Scrolling through the official 211 Ventura County page, amidst so many services, there's a section dedicated to something called Ventura County versus Hate. The description is gentle, full of supportive language, If you've experienced a hate incident, felt targeted by racism, homophobia, or intolerance, call 211, talk to someone, ask for help. At first glance, it's the kind of text that makes you nod and agree. Of course, that's important, and that's precisely where the first subliminal message comes in. Many people ignored it. But look what was said the minute this campaign was presented to the public. Not as an isolated service, but as part of a broader network of anti-hate initiatives, connected to the state program California versus hate and supported by institutional partnerships that don't make the headlines, but do appear behind the scenes. Instead of just a phone number, 211 became an official gateway to a monitoring and incident management system, where every call becomes data, statistics, and reports. On its own, this doesn't prove anything, until you scroll down a bit further and find another harmless section, the part where 211 explains that, in partnership with Southern California Edison, it offers special support for vulnerable customers during safety-related power outages. The famous PSPs, they talk about transportation, temporary accommodation, help with batteries, generators, a whole logistical operation to minimize the impact of power cuts on sick people, the elderly, and families at risk. It's nice. It's correct. And at the same time, it's the key to understanding the game, because when you put this information side by side with the 211 California Network's annual report, the story becomes even clearer. In that document, written to account to funders and authorities, 211 California reports that in 2023 it continued to partner with PG&E and Southern California Edison to execute programs related to power outages and community crisis support. This is not a complaint. It is not an anonymous accusation. It is the system itself boasting about its close relationship with the two giants that dominate energy in the region. No one connected the dots, but the clue was there all along. The same infrastructure that receives disparate calls during blackouts, climate crises, and hate incidences. At the same time, a stage where SCE and PG&E appear as partners, supporters, almost official benefactors of the community, while lawsuits, reports, and investigations point to these companies as protagonists in some of California's biggest electrical disasters. They emerge within this 211 ecosystem as the outstretched hand that never abandons anyone. Do you see the contrast out there in the courts and in the headlines? These companies are responsible for billions in settlements and accusations that their lines and equipment helped turn entire landscapes to ashes. Here, in the carefully calibrated environment of institutional reports and websites, they appear alongside words like care, resilience, justice, equity, and fighting hate. The same brand that is seen as a symbol of risk in one context is sold as a symbol of protection in another. And this is where the ESG agenda comes in, the so-called corporate woke agenda that you see popping up in debates around the world. The logic is simple. If a company is mired in controversy because of fires, power outages, and devastating impacts on communities, it desperately needs positive stories, actions that can be listed in sustainability reports, partnerships that generate seals, awards, and honorable mentions. And what is the most sensitive, delicate, and powerful terrain for this today? Hate crimes, racism, violence against minorities. When you see 211 Ventura County connected to Ventura County versus hate, while within the same institutional ecosystem, partnerships with PG&E and SCE emerge for programs that become showcases in state reports. You're not looking at spontaneous charity. You're looking at a professional reputation machine, where every dollar invested in fighting hate or crisis support returns multiplied in the form of image, influence, and moral protection. And that's just the first external clue, the one that was in plain sight for everyone to see on official websites, in public PDFs and texts that nobody reads carefully because they seem too bureaucratic. When you see this hidden layer within the humanitarian discourse, you begin to realize that the problem may never have been just hatred between people. Not just people, but an entire system that has learned to transform every tragedy into an opportunity to score higher on the corporate virtue scale. Follow along with me. I open my browser, type 211 Ventura County Interface Children and Family Services, and open the service's official website. Right off the bat, the description is impeccable. 24-hour service, crisis assistance, connections to health services, shelter, food, everything organized as if it were the nerve center of the county's solidarity network. I scroll slowly, as anyone would without suspecting anything, until I find the part where 211 explains that it's also the gateway for reporting hate incidents. In partnership with the California vs. Hate program and the local campaign Ventura County vs. Hate. Now, pay attention. In the text, they say that if you have suffered or witnessed a hate incident, you can call 211 to receive support, guidance, and help registering the case in the system. When I cross-reference this with public posts from 211 itself and official campaign profiles, the pattern repeats itself. Hate has no home in Ventura County. If you or someone you know has suffered hate, call 211. It's not just a phone line. It's an official funnel for reports, transforming each traumatic experience into data, statistics, and, above all, an institutional narrative against hate. I'm going to open another document now. The 211 Network's annual report in California, the 2023 211 CA annual report. Instead of looking at it like normal people, do skipping straight to the nice summary eye, use the search bar and type Southern California, Edison, and PG&E. And there it is. The report describes how in 2023, 211 California continued to operate in partnership with utilities such as Pacific Gas and Electric Company and Southern California Edison for programs related to power outage safety programs, PSPs, and community support. It's written with pride, like a seal of legitimacy. A social welfare network working hand in hand with the two largest energy providers, involved in the state's biggest electrical scandals. Now I'm doing what almost no one else does. I'm opening articles and documents about these same companies in another tab. I'm leaving the polished PDF and diving into reports about billion-dollar settlements to recover costs from fires linked to electrical infrastructure, the volatility of Edison's stock under scrutiny for wildfires, and lawsuits accusing equipment of contributing to disasters that destroyed homes and lives. On another official page of Ventura County itself, I see the Wildfire Assistance Southern California Edison section, explaining assistance programs after fires and power outages, as if those who help repair the damage are precisely those who never had anything to do with it. The same name that appears as potentially responsible in the crisis appears as a partner in the response. Now comes the crucial point. I return to the anti-hate universe. The 211 website, materials from the Ventura County vs. Hate campaign, institutional posts where 211 is presented as the official channel for reporting hate crimes and receiving support, while reinforcing the idea of a united community against extremism. Instead of just looking at the emotional text, I start looking at the footer, the credits, who appears as a supporter, partner, or funder. And when you see these same energy giants integrated into the 211 network and celebrated in reports of community programs that generate ESG points, the image changes completely. It's no longer just fighting hate. It's a perfect showcase for companies accused of causing enormous harm to position themselves as guardians of the community. At that moment, the screen ceases to be just a website. It becomes an institutional map. Each logo, each mention, each cute paragraph is a piece of a system that discovers in people's pain a way to buy. Virtue on an industrial scale. L. Imagine the scene that no one shows in those colorful reports. While a family watches from their car as their house turns to ashes because of yet another fire connected to the electrical grid in another building. With air conditioning and champagne glasses, executives explain how community programs against hate will help restore the company's image and improve its ESG score. On one side, the father who worked his whole life, now trying to figure out how he's going to pay for a new house, a new refrigerator, a new bed for his children, while still grappling with the rising electricity bill. On the other, the board of directors discussing how partnerships with services like 211 versus hate campaigns and support projects during blackouts will be highlighted in the next annual report as proof of commitment to the community. While residents calculate what's left after fires, blackouts, and successive companies like PG&E and Southern California Edison use these same episodes as a backdrop to pose as savers offering assistance with power outages, support programs, and helplines that appear as success stories in official documents. Each family that suffers becomes a number on risk spreadsheets. Each solidarity action becomes a glowing paragraph in the social responsibility report. The moral contrast is obscene. On one side, people have lost their homes, memories, and safety, dependent on a call to 911 to know who to turn to. Often after fires or hateful situations that should never have happened. On the other, shielded presidencies, bonuses tied to stock value and reputation management, where partnerships with campaigns like Ventura County versus Hate and Safe severance programs are presented as proof that the company learned from its mistakes. And when the issue of hate crimes arises, the perversity becomes even greater. Those who are beaten in the street, those who are the target of insults, those who call a helpline like 211 crying, believing they are speaking to a neutral space of support, don't know that at the other end of the chain. These calls feed reports, statistics, and narratives that will be used as marketing ammunition for giants who desperately need a new story to tell about themselves. Pain becomes an indicator. Trauma becomes a case study. Humiliation becomes an example of community resilience in corporate slides. Meanwhile, the real losses are not distributed with the same delicacy. Consumers pay fees, taxes, surcharges, and billion-dollar settlements end up diluted in their bills, while the regulatory system attempts to balance punishment and financial stability, ensuring that, in the end, the structure that caused the problem remains standing now, better trained in how to appear virtuous. Those who lose everything are instructed to seek help. Those who cause the damage are advised to strengthen their ESG strategy. This is where the blood boils, because when you look at the whole picture, you realize that the victim isn't just the person whose house was burned down or who suffered a hate attack. The victim is any ordinary person who pays taxes, fees, and charges, who believes they are funding infrastructure and protection, but in practice is supporting a charade where the same companies implicated in scandals emerge as protagonists of healing, care, and the fight against hate. You look at the image on one side, a resident with everything packed in cardboard boxers trying to start over. On the other, executives smiling alongside community leaders, holding signs with slogans about inclusion and combating hate with the company logo prominently displayed. And you realize that the word solidarity has been hijacked to serve as a shield for those who don't want to be seen merely as responsible for crises, but as an indispensable part of the narrative of the solution. Do you think it's fair that this system, these corporations, this real villain profit millions, while the victim, the taxpayer, the affected resident, the person who suffered the crime and became a statistic, loses everything and is still used as an extra in the marketing of virtue? Comment below with the word justice if you are also outraged by what I have shown you so far. Because it is at that moment, when indignation overflows, that it becomes impossible to continue believing that we are facing mere coincidence or ill-gotten corporate goodwill. Interpreted. And the only way out is to follow the money trail, the reports, and the partnerships until you see the complete picture of the machine that transformed tragedy into a business model. When you start looking at this as a system and not as isolated cases, things get much more uncomfortable. The partnership between 211 Ventura County versus hate and energy giants like PG&E and Southern California Edison is not a curious accident in a specific county. It's a portrait of an entire model of how corporations in crisis learn to occupy the center of a community's moral narrative. The same mechanism that uses fires, blackouts, and trauma as a backdrop for assistance programs uses hate crimes and social fear as a stage to prove commitment to diversity and justice. Consider the cold logic of this game. On one hand, companies responsible for billions in costs related to environmental and electrical disasters need to convince regulators, investors, and the public that they are not just irresponsible profit-making machines. On the other hand, governments and NGOs depend on funding, agreements, and partnerships to keep lines like the 211 helpline versus hate campaigns and crisis support programs running. The result is a web in which each actor depends on the other. The corporation hands over money and gains reputation. The NGO delivers a positive narrative and gains a reprieve. The public authorities provide official approval and receive the promise of social and economic stabilization. This is where ESG ceases to be just a pretty acronym and becomes a mechanism for controlling the narrative about who is truly in charge. When PG&E and SCE appear in reports as partners in community programs assistance during power outages, post-fire support, collaboration with networks like 211, this is not just philanthropy, it's a strategic investment in reputational protection. These same reports become ammunition in meetings with regulators, in conversations with rating agencies, in negotiations to pass on disaster costs to consumers without completely destroying the company's image. Notice the detail. When something goes wrong on a massive scale of wildfire, a blackout, an explosion of hate speech, complaints to the average citizen is instructed to seek help through official support channels, such as 211, the national emergency number, wildfire assistance websites, and anti-hate campaigns. They're seeking guidance and support, but without realizing it, they also enter a chain of data that will be used to show how the system reacted, how institutions learned from the event, how corporations stood alongside the community in difficult times. Each call, each form, each case becomes proof of institutional performance, not just human suffering. At the same time, the way the problem is framed matters a great deal. If the public focus is always on hatred between individuals, on extremist groups, on structural racism as something abstract, the gaze shifts away from the material structures that allow certain companies to maintain power even after repeated crises. Racism becomes a kind of generic villain ghost that haunts the entire society, while the concrete role of those who control infrastructure, tariffs, investments, and political decisions is protected by layers of reports and emotional campaigns. The system shifts attention from the question who financially benefits from this chaos to how can we promote more dialogue and awareness. And this doesn't just happen in the energy sector. The same pattern is replicated in banks that finance the economic crises and then appear as sponsors of financial literacy programs for vulnerable people, in technology companies accused of leaking data that later raise banners of privacy and digital security, and in food giants linked to obesity epidemics that suddenly become health partners in public campaigns. The sector changes, the product changes, but the script is the same. First, the damage. Then, the strategic repositioning as an essential part of the solution. In the middle, a web of NGOs, governments, and community initiatives that help tell this new story. In the specific case of Ventura County, the situation becomes even more symbolic because the same network that operates the 211 emergency number, a direct link between vulnerable populations and essential services, is used as a showcase for partnerships with utilities and safe disconnection programs and emotional campaigns. Related to hate incidents, the line that should be neutral, almost sacred, becomes simultaneously a support tool and a piece of institutional marketing, not necessarily because the operators on the front lines are to blame, but because, at the top, the way these services are presented in reports is deliberately designed to generate moral capital. This web closes when you understand that to maintain itself, it needs a constant flow of crises, traumas, and problems that justify its own existence. A perfectly stable world without catastrophic fires, without blackouts, without outbreaks of hatred would be a terrible scenario for those who built their careers, budgets, and power on the promise of managing, mitigating, and communicating these crises. The system doesn't create all tragedies on purpose, but it quickly learns to use them, shape them, and tell them in a way that keeps resources flowing into the same hands, year after year. And when you put it all together, the partnerships formalized in PDFs, the discrete logos on service websites, the anti-hate campaigns, the post-fire assistance pages, the billion-dollar lawsuits settled through agreements that end up diluted in the population's bills, you realize that you are not facing a series of coincidences. You are facing an industrialized modus operandi in which social pain is raw material and corporate virtue is the final product. The remaining question is no longer whether this happens, but how far this type of machinery can go when no one is willing to face the real cost of letting the top of the pyramid also control the narrative of who was a victim and who was a hero.